Hi, I'm Claire Henderson, and I chose to do my project on the Harlem Renaissance. I was introduced to Harlem while researching author Anne Petrie for my author discussion. The Harlem Renaissance was such an important part of African American history and culture in the United States. In this project, I'll share with you how influential the music, art, poetry, and literature that emerged during this time period from Harlem was in achieving equality and civil rights for African Americans. It was a true movement of progress which was led by prominent and influential figures such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Langston Hughes, an author, poet, and playwright. Legendary musicians such as Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Billie Holiday, and Louis Armstrong. I really enjoyed learning more about this time period and the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance had such a lasting effect on the Black movement in America and is a reminder to current generations of the progress that has been made in achieving equality for all. The Harlem Renaissance, which took place in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City from 1910 through the mid-1930s, was a time of social and artistic expression for African American culture through literature, music, performances, and art. It was led by prominent figures like W.E.B. Du Bois with the main goal of achieving equality and civil rights. It all started with a migration from the South to the North, what became known as the Great Migration. Hundreds of thousands of African Americans moved to cities such as Chicago, Los Angeles, Detroit, Philadelphia, and New York, where there were jobs for workers of every race in a more racially open-minded environment in hopes of a better life. In the 1880s, Harlem was an upper-class white neighborhood, but in the early 1900s, some middle-class Black families moved to Harlem and many others followed. Thus, the Harlem Renaissance began, and with that, some of the greatest minds and talents emerged to create lasting legacies. The Harlem Renaissance included poetry, paintings and sculpture, jazz and swing, opera and dance. All of the different art forms united to show the realistic presentation of what it meant to be Black in America, along with asserting their civil rights. The Renaissance's most significant contributors include intellectuals like W.E.B. Du Bois, famous poet and author Langston Hughes, performers Josephine Baker and Paul Robeson, writers Zora Neale Hurston and Countee Cullen, artists Aaron Douglas and Augusta Savage, and a long list of talented musicians including Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, Fats Waller, and so many more. They all sought to embrace Black heritage and culture into the American life as a way to achieve appreciation. Billie Holiday was a female African American jazz singer who played an important role in the Harlem Renaissance. She was known for her vocal style, which was inspired by jazz instrumentalists in manipulating the tempo. Her most famous song was Strange Fruit. The song was a cry for civil rights as it had awoken the consciousness of the general public. The song talks about lynching, which happened in fruit trees. She would even perform the song on a dark stage with only a spotlight on her face to show the Black struggle. Here's a video of Billie Holiday performing Strange Fruit in 1959.
Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth.
Jazz was the sound of the Harlem Renaissance. Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway were two of the many musicians that were well known for their jazz music, especially Duke Ellington's song Take the A Train to Harlem. Jazz in general is very rhythmic and has a forward momentum called swing. It is used to express many different emotions anywhere from pain to joy. Duke Ellington moved to New York City just as jazz was becoming the dominant style of music in the Harlem Renaissance. He had a band called the Washingtonians, which played at many well-known nightclubs, one of them being Cotton Club. Cab Calloway, a showman and gifted singer, was also associated with the Cotton Club. He was known for scat singing, which is improvised jazz singing in which the voices are used to imitate instruments. The Cotton Club was a famous club in Harlem for performances. The Cotton Club was created for a white audience who wanted to experience Black culture without having to interact with African Americans. Thus, the club was intended to look like a Southern plantation with new music and dancers that were only African Americans as the entertainment. Many great performers played at the Cotton Club, including Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway, who I mentioned just earlier, and Josephine Baker, who became an influential cultural icon. Now here's a video of dancers at the Cotton Club in 1933. Now I want to shift my attention over to one of the leading voices of the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes was a very popular writer who wrote about the Black struggle through poems, books, and playwrights. His creativity was brought to life by Harlem. He would show the experiences, both positive and negative, of being a Black man. He promoted equality, denouncing racism and injustice, and celebrated African American culture. He spent time in the Cotton Club writing about it and founded the style of poetry called jazz poetry. Jazz poetry is when the rhythm of the poem is spoken to sounds that jazz music makes. Some of Langston Hughes' poems that are still relevant today are As I Grew Older, Mother to Son, and The Weary Blues. He also wrote a poem titled Dreams Deferred, which I thought was very interesting.
What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?
The Harlem Renaissance came to an end in the 1930s after the effects of the stock market crash and the Great Depression. However, many good things came out of the Renaissance. It helped Americans and the world understand African American culture better, along with leading to the civil rights movement of the 1940s and 1950s. Thank you.